First, I'll be taking you through the making of the hood mold and then the making of the side panels. This is the model ready to have the mold made on top of it. This will be the exact piece. Here's the mold. I've laid out the fiberglass, and the edges aren't trimmed very well. I did this late and didn't have time to trim it while it was green. So now I have to go back later after the fact and sand the edges or grind the edges to get them clean enough so that they'll come apart good. So here's what we have. This is the mold, first edition, laid up 4 layers thick, ready to be separated from the model. Now the mold still has some edges on it that need to be trimmed. I wasn't able to cut them last night while they were still green, so I'm going to have to use a sander, a DA, to sand them clean and get it so the mold will separate right. And here it is after sanding. I've got the edges clean, and you can see I used a 36 grit DA on a DA to grind the edges. You need to get the gel coat cut down to the edge. Right there's a spot where it didn't quite come off right. I'll have to sand that a little better. Right there. So once I get the gel coat separated, I'll be able to separate the mold from the model. Now here we go. I've got it all cleaned up on the edges. I'm looking for a place to start my separation. Right there I found it. Once you get the mold separated from the model, and this is the same process whether you're taking a piece out of the mold or the mold off of your model. So you need to get the wedges in there and start moving them around all the way around. Now the models have, or the molds, are always waxed about 6 times before you get started with the whole process. And here it is after I've got it all loose, taken it out, ran wedges all the way around, popped it loose, and there's the mold. The thing is, it's still a little flimsy, so we're going to have to brace it up by setting it back in place. It's already broke loose, but I'll set it right back in the original place and build a framework that'll help me get the mold stiffened up so it won't flex when we make the parts. We want this mold to be solid like a rock. So I'll build a wooden frame, and we'll glass this on to make the rest of the mold stiff. Now the edges are stiff enough, it's just that the whole thing will flex if we don't tie this together really solid. So that's the purpose of building this frame, is to tie this all together really solid. You see where I've sanded the fiberglass, and that's to make the resin stick better. Resin will stick better to a surface that's been sanded than a slick surface like the original fiberglass. So this is what we'll be doing, is glassing this whole thing in to make it solid. Okay, now we'll start applying the glass to this new section. I make these smaller pieces like this, and that way you can keep adding more small pieces, and you won't have big pieces that overlap and have to be trimmed later or that get in the way. So I soak down the edges or the surface, work the mat in, and coat it in good. This will be the process. We'll do this all the way around on all four sides and the middle. This will all get stiffened up so that this will make this mold one solid piece. We'll always flex the parts out of it, but we want the mold to be as solid as possible so the piece isn't deformed or warped later. We want a solid piece to come out of this mold, and it's got to be shaped right without any deformity to it. I usually overlap these and get these all glassed in, and we'll make that work. Finish putting on the resin, stiffen this thing up. I'll demonstrate the making of the panels or the hood. This is a little easier to show you using the mold for the side panels. This is the mold. We're going to spray it up with the gel coat, and then we'll apply the fiberglass over the gel coat. So here's the mold, waxed up 6 times, ready to go. Then what we'll do is we'll spray up the gel coat into the mold, and I'm using a blue gel here. Sure is a lot easier with a contrasting gel. I made the molds out of white gel rather than tooling gel. It's just a little cheaper, and I don't need to make enough parts to justify the extra cost for the more expensive gel coat. So the blue gel was extra from another customer, so I bought it cheap. I got it for about half price. Nobody else wants the blue gel. I'm going to throw paint on the car anyway, or I may leave it blue. But first, the gel coat's applied. So here's the blue gel after it's been applied. It's got a good texture to it. It's thick enough. It's not too thick. Next step is to apply all the fiberglass to it. You let the gel coat harden up or stiffen up for about 45 minutes, and then you start putting on the fiberglass and the polyester resin. After we do that, we'll trim it. So here we are, and we'll start laying up the fiberglass. Now we have the piece laid up, ready to finish. It's still green, and we're going to knife trim the edge while it's still green. Get a start, and it trims really easy. It's still green fiberglass. So we'll trim it with a knife and scrape the edges or sand the edges, get the edges so they'll separate. But right now it's green, and we're going to trim it. Makes the trim a lot easier. Now what we need to do is separate the piece from the mold, and after trimming it, what we do is I'll scrape the edges with a knife or sand it, make sure that we can find a spot that we can get in and get this separated. Scrape it like that and look for a spot where we can get this trimmed.
So when it does separate, there's no hanging down over the edge to chip up the gel coat. There it is. Now, my molds were made with the cheap white gel coat instead of the tooling gel, because I don't expect to use these to make a million pieces. But I ended up buying some blue gel, dark blue gel, because it was cheap. It was over-ordered, so I could get it cheap. And there it is. Voila. There's my side panel. Now this is still fairly green, and it's going to flex a little bit, quite a bit. But that's my side panel and my rear fenders. And I'll just go lay that, I can leave that in the mold here for a while to harden up to keep its shape. You don't want it hardening up if it's bent and it hardens out of shape like with a curl on it or something. So I'll lay that out and then I'll spray up another one. But that is the last one to make this track car. So I have all 4 side panels, 2 doors, 2 rear fenders. The hood covers the front fenders, except for a couple of small pieces where the battery goes in the original Corvette. Okay, there it is. The hood skin is out in the mold. This is the first one out of the mold. It's laying in place with the nose piece on. The hood skin weighs 20 pounds. The original was 220. I will have to add about 5 pounds to reinforce it, but there's the Vette. Badass C4. And now we're going to move on to the rest of the build of the C4.